If I'm hearing right, that's Brother LaVon, right? Is that how you say the name? I don't have this in my notes, but you brought this up, so I just had to add this to what I'm doing. I was in my study. It was a Sunday night, average Sunday night, going over my notes before I went out to share, and my phone rang. And the gentleman on the other end of the phone introduced himself as being Glenn Stringham, whom I knew well, and he was a pastor on the other side of the county. And he said, Lester, said, I've called you to try to verify a rumor that I have heard. And I said, all right, Glenn, what's the rumor? He said, well, I heard that there was a lady in my church that got mad at me and left my church and went and joined your church. And now she's mad at you and she's coming back to my church. And I said, Glenn, I don't know if it's true or not, but I hope it is. It was, for what it's worth. There's more, but my wife told me I couldn't tell a lot of stories today if you only got 15 minutes, so I will try to honor that. And I'm deaf, just about. So I want you to talk. So if you speak up so I can hear it, or I'm going to have to get Eric to come up here and tell me what you're saying. The newspaper, just the everyday newspaper. What educational level is the newspaper written on?
Today, not much.
Come on, Dr. Simmons, you ought to know that.
Probably about a fifth grade.
Huh?
Probably about a fifth grade.
Fifth grade? Anybody else have anything to offer? Fifth grade? Anybody? It's written at the sixth grade. The newspaper's written at the sixth grade level. And in one of the schools that I attended after college, they had an interesting requirement. As we wrote papers, we had to take the first page, the middle page, and the last page, and give it to a sixth grade student, and their job was to circle any word they didn't understand. Huh? Now, I know there's a lot of education here, and we can take it right up here, but if we don't get it down here where it connects, it just doesn't work. So I try to write that way, try to teach that way, which is not my forte, and try to preach that way. And with that said, if you see anything that I've written in this chapter that'll fit in your gun, you want to shoot it, have at it, brother. It's not copyrighted, it's not patent, and it's just, I'm going through the outlines that people have submitted, and there's some really good stuff there that all of our presenters have been sharing. So what I want to do in the time that I have is to give you the general theme of 1 Timothy chapter 6. Generally speaking, what's it about? And then just mention the 6 ways that it breaks it down in that chapter, and you've got that in your notes. And then go back and deal with point 1. And if I have any time left, I'll do point 2, but there's no way in the world I'm going to try to finish all of this today in this presentation with the same way that everybody looked at it. So as I read this chapter, all of it, and just sitting at my desk and my computer, what is the message that's growing out of this passage? And the word that I came up with out of this was the word godliness. Godliness, righteousness, holiness. Godliness. I did a study, I really wrote my dissertation on this, on the Sermon on the Mount. And I was doing pretty good till I got to Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. And I'm sure all of you read it in your private devotions this morning. You know, I don't have to quote it for you, but this is what it says. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And I knew, brother, when I read that I misunderstood what he was saying. Because it ought to have had the word in there somewhere that said, except, when you run into one of these sisters in the church like Brother LaJuan was talking about. Or the lady who called my secretary Friday and said she's never coming back to the church again, and she gave a whole long list of reasons she's not coming back. But at the end of the day, she's not coming back because she doesn't like me anymore. You know, there's one distinction I have standing up here that nobody in this room has. I'm the oldest person in this room. I grew up in the church. My dad was the pastor of the church. I grew up I got a 9-month perfect attendance pin for Sunday school when I was born. My mama kept me in the church. And I've, been pastoring for 58 plus years now. And I'm just going to add her name to a long list that's there. Except, well, it doesn't say except. So I'm not a Greek scholar like my new friend sitting over here, and I looked at all that and I thought, whoo, well, that's impressive. I can't even pronounce those words. I have no idea. But I looked it up in the Greek to see what it said. Sure, there's an exception to that, to the word perfect. And you know what it means in the Greek? Perfect. There is no exception clause. That the call that God is giving via the Holy Spirit to Paul that he writes to Timothy is godliness. And it breaks down into 6 divisions. Again, you've got it in this note. Godly witness in action, godliness in Jesus only, godliness in contentment, godliness in zeal, godliness in humility, and godliness in a faithful finish. Godliness. And so then in mind, I just sat down and, tried to do something that we tried to get through the seminary without doing, but actually read the Bible and see what it had to say. And so this is what it says in verse 1 and half of verse 2. All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. That those with believing masters should show them disrespect just because they are fellow believers. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves. I read that and I thought, Paul doesn't live in the world I live in. Well, come on, relax. I'm not going to say anything radical. That was last week. And I thought, slavery? Are you kidding me? Well, think about it for a minute. I don't know where you live, but when you get to the city limits of San Antonio, does the world end? No, I'm serious. When you get to the city limits of San Antonio, does the world end? Is this Bible just written for San Antonio, or is it written for the entire world? And if you break out of our immediate environment for a moment, slavery still exists all around the world. Shocking. And Paul says, if you're under those circumstances, you must allow your Christian character to radiate as a witness. So let's come back home for a minute. Let's come back to San Antonio. I've only been here 3 years, so I'm working hard to catch up. 48 years in Atlanta, but I'm working really hard to catch up. Before 21, when the migrant crisis just kept flooding across the border with the coyotes and the cartels, and the sex trafficking, and all of that. Before that ever started, Interstate 10, major corridor for sex trafficking, slavery. The tendency that we have to think is that everybody else lives like we live, thinks like we think. And my wife, bless her heart, I'm glad she's not here to hear me say this. She doesn't know how to shop like you're supposed to shop in the grocery store. Now, you ladies listening, you need to hear this. Before you go to the grocery store, you need to make a list. You hear me? And if it's not on the list, you don't buy it. You hear what I'm saying? She said to me one day, she said, "You're no fun to go to the grocery store with. You just go and get what you want and turn around and leave." I think the last time I counted in our pantry, there's 16 cans of green beans. And I mean it. If it is, we probably need some more of this, You know how many rolls of paper I mean, really? So, here's an individual working at minimum wage that has an abusive supervisor that needs that job to buy whatever he can for the family to eat and for the clothes that they need, has to have that job. Is that a form of slavery? I mean, think about it. I live out toward Helotes, okay, in Wild Oak, close to where Dr. Horn lives, but he lives in a gated community. I'm not that high class, all right, and have a couple of cars, cell phones, that kind of thing. I see y'all sitting around here with all of those little tablets that you're working from and computers, and I'm working off paper. You know why? Because if I bump it, it doesn't disappear. And there's nothing like being in the middle of a sermon and looking down and saying, "What happened?" Or if you saw it, and I like Eric over here, but did you see the dinosaurs on the screen earlier? What he says to us is, irregardless of our circumstances in life, our Christian character is to radiate through that. Period. So as a child, I lived in Texas, and 10 years old in Ben Wheeler, Texas, about 25 miles outside of Tyler. And I had done some kind of job, I don't know what it was, but I had $2. It's the first $2 I ever had in my life. In that little bitty town, 350 people, a little general store that I could see from the front porch of the house. I was out, I was headed toward the front door, and Mama said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to the store." I knew where the candy aisle was. I knew where the M&Ms and the Hershey bars were. I was rich. I had $2. And she said, "Isn't there something you're supposed to do with that $2 before you go off to the store?" Like what? I said, "What about the part?" She said, "What about the part of that belongs to the Lord?" And I thought, well, the Lord wasn't involved in the chore that I performed to get this $2. This $2 is mine. The Lord doesn't have anything to do with it. And she said, "Well, son, your daddy and I need to tell you that 20 cents of that belongs to the Lord." And I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, that's your tithe. You need to give that at the church." And I went, "Oh." You know what I thought as a 10-year-old boy? This must be what the other adults in the church are doing in their homes. They're teaching their children the importance of the tithe. That a part of the life that we live is our financial obligation to give that back to the Lord. I'll tell you, I grew up in pastor's home, right? And then I became a pastor. And I just got hit upside the head one day. Everybody's not tithing. I go in the finance meeting and they say, oh man, it looks so bad, preacher. How in the world are we going to be able to pay our bills? You know? So, here's the thought. No organization ever rises above its leadership. Now, I know I'm talking to leaders. No organization ever rises above its leadership. And I don't know all the Christian denominations out there, but let me tell you, I know Southern Baptist. So I want to ask you one last question, and I'll be done. What percentage of pastors tithe? Percentage. The leaders in the church. What percentage of them tithe? Anybody want to guess?
70%.
Say again?
70%.
70%? Anybody else? I want to say it again. No organization ever rises above its leadership. It's 10%. And when I learned that, I thought, no wonder we're in the shape we're in. No wonder. Well, Dale Horn got disappointed the other day. He was all prepared to come and hear me preach. And on the morning he was coming to hear me preach, I came down with a UTI and I said, hey, how about you doing the Lord's Supper today? And he said, well, I want to hear you preach. Well, Darrell, this is the closest you've ever got. So God bless you all. Love you. Just thank you. Appreciate you. Good stuff y'all hearing today.